AFC Championship, Chiefs, Bengals. The general theme of this game is Patrick Mahomes has an ankle injury. Patrick Mahomes is hurt. He's going to be hobbling. Like he looked okay, right? Coming into the game, he looked mobile enough to be really effective. And again, even with Mahomes at 80% or a bum ankle, he's still better than most quarterbacks in the league. It looked like he was pretty okay and pretty mobile towards the beginning of the game. There were a few plays where he had to scramble out left and right and put a lot of pressure and a lot of weight on that right ankle. And when he did that, he walked away hobbling pretty severely. That being said, he still has one of the best arm talents in the entire league and potentially ever in the history of the NFL. So some of the throws he made were absolutely ridiculous. A touchdown pass to Marquez Valdez-Scantling, I think in the second quarter, crazy throw. And it's apparent that Mahomes is better than than Joe Burrow, right? I think there was some discussion. There was some discussion and some debate about who's better, Mahomes or Burrow. Most people would say it was Mahomes, but some people's argument was, well, Burrow's played him 3 times and beat him 3 times, and that is partially true. But the other thing that hasn't been tossed into the conversation and consideration that I feel like is the home field factor. The home field factor for Kansas City is so severe that it's going to single-handedly win them a lot of games. Of those 3 games where Cincinnati's beaten Kansas City, 2 out of the 3 have been in Cincinnati. And as we know, the third game was in Kansas City in the AFC Championship last year. And it was a situation where, Cincinnati just exceeded their level of play, I think, and everybody just stepped up and went crazy. I mean, you had guys like Samaje Perine like going off. You had the defense for Cincinnati going off. And that to me was the deciding factor in this game because we talk about who's better. We talk about, is it Mahomes? Is it Burrow? And the argument was going both ways. I still said Mahomes was slightly better than Burrow. And I think this game would show that. But I think the story of this game and the story of any quarterback moving forward, especially when you compare these 2 guys, Mahomes and Burrow, the story is always going to be determined based on how a quarterback plays under pressure. Mahomes lost a lot of his receivers early on. I think he lost Kadarius Toney early on. Mecole Hardman is a 50-50 kind of coming back from injury option. He ended up having to throw the ball to guys like Marcus Kemp, Juju Smith-Schuster, who's, is a good receiver, but he's not even like his 3rd or 4th target most of the time. Threw the ball to Pacheco a bunch of times, McKinnon a bunch of times, Marquez Valdez-Scantling a bunch of times, Kelsey, obviously, right? But when you compare the weapons that he was working with in Kansas City to the other side of the ball with T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, Hayden Hurst, etc., I think a lot of people would argue as a cumulative unit, Cincinnati's offensive receiving weapons are a lot better than Kansas City's offensive receiving weapons. Kelsey carries the offensive receiving weapons for Kansas City. After that, it's running backs and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. That's pretty much it. But in Cincinnati, you got guys like T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Tyler Boyd, who all of which could potentially be wide receiver 1 on a handful of teams. And they are, I think it's wide receiver 1A and wide receiver 1B with Chase and T. Higgins. Tyler Boyd's wide receiver 2 or 3, right? But you put Tyler Boyd on a handful of other teams in the NFL, he might be wide receiver 1. Plus Joe Burrow, plus Samaje Perine, plus Joe Mixon and Samaje Perine. Joe Burrow's got a lot more to work with. The issue that Cincinnati ran into that I think was the deciding factor, take the referees and the other play calls out of it. The deciding factor between Burrow and Mahomes is how each guy played under pressure and the decision-making that they had. Mahomes under pressure on a bum ankle threw some of the most ridiculous throws I've seen in the NFL this season. Crazy accurate throws. And yeah, he missed some throws too, definitely. But 326 yards, 2 touchdowns is crazy. He also got sacked 3 times for 11-yard losses. Burrow got sacked 5 times for 32 losses. And at the end of the day, when you look at the play of both the quarterbacks, I think Burrow was working with a pieced together offensive line. So certainly a disadvantage for him at quarterback. But I think Mahomes and Burrow were under the same amount of pressure throughout the game. It's just how each guy went about handling it. In the sake of Mahomes, he would scramble, roll up, step up in the pocket, and then throw off one foot, some ridiculous throw. Burrow took a lot of sacks. And then when Burrow was under pressure, he made some questionable, kind of high risk, high reward decisions. One of his interceptions was thrown into double coverage that was eventually tipped up in the air and intercepted. And then another one of his throws was a one-on-one ball kind of matchup throw against a DB with T. Higgins, where he kind of just, again, threw it up in the air, and the DB played excellent coverage on T. Higgins and just pulled it in. Interception. There weren't very many throws from Mahomes in this AFC Championship game where I was like, oh, bad throw. Like, there was, I think maybe one tip, but that was it. With Burrow, I feel like every drive he made a throw where you were like, whoa, okay, including a Jamar Chase catch down on the red zone that ended up leading to a touchdown on 4th down, I believe. He just threw it up to Chase in double coverage. Burrow also had a lot of good, accurate throws in this game. A couple balls, Hayden Hurst had a potential touchdown that he didn't pull in. That was a perfectly thrown ball by Joe Burrow. Another ball that was a sideline ball to Jamar Chase that hit him in the helmet. Perfectly thrown ball. But perfectly thrown doesn't necessarily mean it was a great decision. Because perfectly thrown can end up converting and turning into a reception. But when it's super tight coverage or double coverage or tight window throws, those aren't going to be converted at an incredibly high rate. Doesn't hurt that the throws are perfect, but Burrow last year in that game against Kansas City felt like he had a lot of those plays and a lot of those throws that were, I don't want to say not like miracle throws, but like incredibly tight window throws. Combine that with a check down screen to Samaje Perine that goes 38 yards to the house. Jamar Chase, the touchdown last year in the AFC Championship, one-on-one kind of back shoulder, low fade jump ball. Not even a jump ball. It was, again, low fade back shoulder. Jamar Chase just makes a play. And that's on Joe Burrow in a good way, too. It's a positive that you can give him and say, okay, his decision-making is obviously really high level and that he knows where his matchups are going to be favorable. And that's definitely something Joe Burrow is good at. He picks out his matchups. Even, like I said, the double team sort of just throw up on 4th and 6 or 4th and 5 or whatever to Jamar Chase in that game to put him in the inside goal to go situation. Was it a good throw? Maybe. Was it a favorable matchup? Maybe. But at the end of the day, he knows Jamar Chase is a playmaker. You take all of that stuff into consideration. And yes, everybody with a brain and eyes can see that Kansas City got a lot of help from the referees in that game last night. That game was officiated in favor of Kansas City. I don't know if there's technically a statistic to quantify that, especially since a lot of the calls that went in favor of Kansas City were judgment calls. But there were a handful of plays that could have gone either way and seemingly always went towards Kansas City. A lot of missed penalties on Cincinnati. That is neither here nor there. Just strictly watching quarterback play and how the quarterbacks executed under pressure and in varying circumstances, Mahomes played much better than Joe Burrow did last night. Much better. Just based on not only, of course, statistics, but the eye test and everything else. So Mahomes is better. Burrow is still very good. I think after the game last night, I think there's some argument or some debate as to who maybe the number 2 quarterback is in the NFL. Because going into next year, you're going to have a handful of guys that are going to be in consideration for those top 5 spots. Brady's going to be deteriorating. Rodgers is deteriorating. And you're going to see guys slide into that top 5 with names like Josh Allen, who's been up there. Justin Herbert, who's been in the conversation. Guys like Trevor Lawrence, Jalen Hurts. So the debate for number 2 is going to be an interesting one, but I think after last night's game, after the AFC Championship between the Chiefs and the Bengals, it's very apparent that Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the NFL. If he comes away with the Super Bowl, if he wins in Kansas City, if Patrick Mahomes wins the Super Bowl, and now let me put it this way. If Mahomes wins the Super Bowl against the Eagles, a top defense in the NFL, and would be having he would have two Super Bowls in the early stages of his career, dealing with injuries, dealing with losing guys like Tyreek Hill, no offensive line, poor defenses. He will have 3 Super Bowl appearances, and he'll have 2 for 3 if he beats the Eagles. There's going to be some discussions and debates that are 100% justified about if Patrick Mahomes may be the greatest quarterback in the history of the NFL. Because everybody knows it's Tom Brady, but everybody knows with a brain and a set of eyes that the throws and the things that Patrick Mahomes does as a quarterback on the field are things that Tom Brady could never do in his entire career. Mahomes does things physically, mentally, that Tom Brady would have never been able to pull off. So it'd be 2 Super Bowls versus 7 for Brady. And of course, Brady would have the edge in that circumstance. But you have to take context. You have to take context into consideration. You have to take defensive efficiencies into consideration and the team as a whole and the sport as a whole, and realize that Mahomes is doing things that no other quarterback could potentially do in the history of the sport. Now, if he loses to Philadelphia, then the conversation stays pretty neutral, and there's not really much debate whether Brady or Mahomes are the best quarterbacks of all time. It's still obvious and apparent that Mahomes is doing crazy things, but in the realm of debate and the realm of value as a quarterback and talking about things like greatest of all time, you have to come out of there with Super Bowl wins. Otherwise, people just won't even entertain the argument. If Mahomes ends up with 3 or even maybe 4 in his career, I don't think there'd be any doubt at that point that he's the greatest quarterback of all time. 2 is a little bit of that gray area where you probably still give the edge to Tom Brady. Now you give him 3 or 2 against the Eagles and a really, really good defense. If he blows them out and puts up 50, there's going to be debates about him being the greatest quarterback of all time. And I think those are entirely justified. Entirely justified. Then you take Mahomes and you put him up against Joe Burrow. I don't think there's even a little bit of a speck of discussion about which guy's better. Mahomes is better. Burrow's still very good. Didn't have a great game. Did have to go on the road. You know, he beat the Ravens earlier in the playoffs. He beat Buffalo on the road. If he'd have beat Kansas City again, that would have been bananas. And that's the other thing going into this conversation is that he had an opportunity. He had 2 fourth quarter possessions, and just, there was some poor blocking on the offensive line. Some stuff where, could have gone either way, and it's not entirely Joe Burrow's fault. Play calling probably could have been a little bit better. Could have developed a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, they didn't get it done. And yeah, the refs helped out a little bit. But Mahomes is better than Burrow. Definitely not really an argument. Mahomes over Burrow. And anybody who says differently is definitely wrong in that situation.